to the camera. Okay.
Okay, so we're on. Okay, so hi everybody. My name, very quickly, is Sue Laver, and I am director of the McGill Writing Centre. And I'm very pleased to introduce you to and to spend some time today with Laurie Weber, who will be teaching a course through the McGill Writing Centre called Writing for Youth. And that course starts January the 23rd next year. Some of you may already be aware that Laurie's published 11 novels for young readers, including young adult fiction, a verse novel, a middle grade novel, and one picture book. This past September, Laurie published her first collection, perhaps you can show us, her first collection of short stories entitled Deep Girls. Two of Laurie's books, Yellow Minnie and Lightning Lou, were runners-up for the Quebec Writers Federation Prize for children's and young adult fiction. Laurie has been teaching creative writing for children at John Abbott College since 1996.
Thank you for that correction.
And we weren't alive then, and has led many workshops on the topic of writing for youth through the Quebec Writers Federation. In addition, and this will be of interest to many of you today, Laurie has also mentored many novice authors in young adult writing, and she's represented Quebec twice for Canadian Children's Book Week. So again, a very warm welcome
Thank you very
to our
much.
guest today,
Thank you.
Laurie. Laurie, I was reviewing your biography earlier today, and one of the things that you mention is in your earlier days, you wrote short stories as well as poems. So I'm wondering if you could tell us what initially drew you to becoming a writer for youth.
Sure. I mean, to be honest, it's something I kind of fell into. It seemed that almost all of my short stories that I wrote, because initially I did publish quite a bit of short fiction, that all of my short stories always had a teenage protagonist. And I think it was just, kind of a period of life, a time of life that I was obviously interested in writing about and exploring. And so I had sent a manuscript off to a publisher that no longer exists, Lester Publishing. And it was the editor who wrote me back and said that she really liked it and she would like to publish it as young adult fiction. And this was back in 1995-ish. And at that time, I wasn't even really that aware of what young adult fiction was. I mean, it was, I think, when it was just kind of starting to become more popular. And so she kind of put the idea in my head. And so I spent quite a bit of time reading the genre and investigating it, and discovered I really liked it. And from that point on, just continued to write for a teen audience. So something I kind of fell into, but that I think my writing was also sort of naturally suited to. It's not as though I changed everything about what I was doing to fit into the genre. It was more that my work seemed to just kind of naturally fit there.
And a publisher was the person who first
put the seed, planted the seed.
Okay. What are some of the most common misconceptions about writing for youth or young adult fiction? Particularly, we're living in an age where there is some hot, if you like, young adult fiction.
Yes, there is, I think one of the things, and I experience this also when I'm working with new writers through the mentorship or whatever, is that a lot of people come to it because it's writing for you, thinking it's going to be easy, or easier.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the number one misconceptions, because it isn't easier just because you're writing for a younger audience. It's just different.
Yeah.
You have to be very aware of audience and there are certain conventions of the genre that you try to respect. But apart from that, it's a very broad creative field. And I think the other misconception might be that young adult fiction is just one thing. It's as broad as, like, if somebody said, can you define for me what adult fiction is, you would kind of go,
Right.
whoa, it's about
Where do I
500, where
begin?
do I begin? And
Yeah.
it's really the same with YA. There's such a range from the whole reluctant readership market, which is, books that are deliberately written for younger readers who are reluctant to read, so they have
Right.
certain conventions, to at the other end of the scale, very, very literary young adult fiction that's actually really very challenging, challenging to read.
Right.
So I think that's one of the other big misconceptions, is that we can easily define it that it's just one thing. And really, it isn't. It's a lot of things. And in any given group that I would work with, of 12 to 20 people, we would have 12 to 20 different types of work that people are
Going on.
presenting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
From our conversations and just from the smidgen of knowledge that I have about the field, there does seem to be two dominant markets, or at least at this point in time. And this is a distinction that you've educated me about to some degree when we've been talking. And that's the middle grade novel and the young adult novel, or middle grade fiction and young adult fiction.
Right.
I wondered if you could speak a little bit about what are some of the main differences between those two genres. Yeah.
I mean, I think the main difference is simply the category of readers that the book would be targeted.
So the audience.
Yeah, the audience. I mean, middle grade is literally, as the name suggests, work that's marketed to or written for middle grade readers, which would go anywhere from grade 6 to 9 ish, but stronger readers in grade 5.
Right.
And even weaker readers in grade 8 and 9. Do you know what I mean? That sort of range. And then young adult fiction would be the older end of things. So from 12 to 19, let's say, although lots of adults read young adult fiction, let's not forget it's a popular genre with adults too. And even with YA, we can talk about books that are geared more towards younger teens, 12 to 14, 15, and books that would be more geared towards older teens. So even there is a range. And then in the course, we would try to pinpoint more finely what some of the concerns are that you would keep in mind if you were intending to write a book for middle grade fiction, especially in terms of subject matter, what you might and might not get away with. Although, having said that, I don't want to give the impression that you have to censor yourself in any way.
Right.
There's great middle grade fiction that's about all kinds of really edgy and controversial issues. It's just that the writing would be delicately targeted towards the younger reader.
Right. So that really, if I can paraphrase a bit, that's the topics, the subject matter doesn't need to be any different necessarily, but how you present it.
That's right.
And your language choices that you're making then become very important depending
Absolutely.
on those developmental differences.
And length of book might come into it a little bit, and in terms of plot, the younger reader would want something maybe a little bit faster paced, would have less ability to sit through, lots and lots of description, that kind of thing. Although I, again, don't want to give the impression that there can't be any description. I feel like it's all about understanding just sort of small degrees of difference, that the writer has to pay attention to. But certainly in terms of subject matter, I've read great middle grade fiction that deals with, sexual abuse issues, school shootings, any number of really big topics. Yeah.
Okay, so in September, just a few months ago, Dancing Cat Books publish your first short
Yes,
story collection,
that's right.
Deep Girls.
Deep Girls. You
If
want me
we
to
can
hold it
just
up
show
again?
that
There it
again.
is again. Yeah.
What drew you, or perhaps drew you back to short stories? Because, as you were saying earlier, you did write short stories.
That's right. Yeah.
In the early part of your career.
Well, true confession time is that most of these stories were actually written when I was quite a bit younger.
Right. That's
The
interesting.
prototype for them, at least. And then, of course, over the years, over the decades, even, you could say I've worked on rewriting them, fine tuning them. I never quite abandoned them.
Yeah.
Quite a few of my earlier novels actually grew out of short stories. So they were short stories first, and there was enough material there. There was enough, sort of interest in the characters to take those stories and really sort of flush them out and expand them into full length novels. But I love the short story as a form. I love reading short stories.
Yeah.
And they're intense. And I love that sense of, the short story that centers on that little special moment that can really turn a character's perception,
Right.
or really affect, great change in a character's point of view or experience. That's and in the short story, of course, every word has to be meaningful. There's
Right.
you're trimming the fat continually. So in terms of a writing exercise, I think it's an interesting one.
Right.
So I love the form. I was really, really thrilled when it's the same people who published Lightning Lou, my last book, which was my middle grade novel. So I was really, really thrilled when my editor, Barry Jowett, and I sent him the stories, and it took him a while to read them, as it usually does, but he wrote me back the most complimentary email I think I've ever received in my life.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, he really loved them. So I was very thrilled, because there's nothing worse than writing you love and is good sitting in a drawer, not seeing the light of day. So I was very happy.
Well, one of the reviews or blurbs about this latest collection, it says that Deep Girls tells stories that defy the conventions of young adult literature. What do you think they mean?
Yeah, that
by
was my editor. That's how he felt about it.
Right.
I think they kind of deliver the unexpected in some respects. I know the one that he's talked about a lot is one that focuses on a girl who's accompanying her mother to visit the grandmother, the mother's mother. And the expectation is of the happy family reunion. They haven't seen each other for a while, but sort of what's waiting for them at the other end is actually a great deal of cruelty that the daughter is helping her mother cope with. It's sort of a reversal of roles.
Right.
That the daughter plays the role of protector, protecting her mother against the cruelty of the grandmother. So my sense is that he was speaking mostly about content.
Right.
That each story, there's one where a girl's in New York with her father, and she wants to have some kind of adventure at a bar. She fancies herself much older and more sophisticated than she is. And without giving too much away, by the end of the night, it's the father who's picked up the piano player, and she's left sitting alone at the table. It's not what she expected when they set out together to have a drink at the hotel bar. So I think that's potentially what he's talking about.
Right.
And also, I mean, for me, there are stories that, like a lot of young adult fiction, that kind of, where young adult fiction almost seems more like a marketing term than really a literary one.
Yeah.
For me, these are stories that anybody could read and get something out of, any age. They're challenging, I think. Yeah. And I think that might also be what he was referring to.
Right. And that goes back to what you were saying earlier, that one of the misperceptions is that it doesn't deal with, writing for youth does not deal with particularly difficult topics,
exactly.
or we don't expect it to. In fact, it does.
It does, yeah.
But we don't expect it to.
And it really does. There's some amazingly complex, wonderful works of young adult fiction that are extremely challenging.
Right.
and where the writing is so strong, the imagery is so strong, all the literary qualities that you look for in a good piece of adult writing are
Yes.
going to be there in a strong young adult novel as
Right.
well. There's no difference in the conventions
Right.
and in the strength of the writing.
Um, let's shift a little bit.
Okay.
Well, now that sort of leads us into my next question. Um, we do talk about the market
Mm-hmm.
for literature, period, let alone writing for youth, young adult
Mm-hmm.
fiction. Um, it has seemed for quite a long time now that the market has been hot, or at least it's been hot for particular
Mm-hmm.
types or subgenres of young adult fiction, particularly fantasy of
Fantasy
various
is big, yeah.
forms. Um, you can answer either of the questions I'm going to ask, or both of them. What do you think um, is behind the predominance, not predominance, the dominance of the fantasy genre in the last few years?
I mean, I think, even though I don't write fantasy, I think
Yeah,
it's great because it's gotten kids reading, hasn't it?
right.
I mean, starting with Harry Potter
Yes,
and then other big, hit series that have come along. I mean, Twilight, which there's a lot of controversy about that one,
right.
but in any case, it got kids reading. The Hunger Games series, Maze Runner, all of those that have come out. I mean, I think teenagers are about wanting to escape, aren't they?
Right.
My work is not fantasy, but I think it offers escape in another way. But I do think that desire to be taken out of one's life
Right.
at that age and enter a whole magical world. And there's usually a little bit of romance, that is thrown in along the way. And the teens are the heroes, they're
Yeah.
fighting the bad guys, and they're resourceful. There's a lot of strong female characters as well in fantasy. And I think a lot of that is what the appeal has been for younger readers.
Right.
But marketers, depending on the publishing company, I don't think they're only looking for fantasy.
Right.
I think they're looking for good, strong writing. I know Dancing Cat, which is division of Cormorant Books. I mean, I know that that's one of their mandates is writing first. Good, strong writing um, is what they're looking for. Obviously that tells a great story that's
Yeah.
going to engage young readers, but the writing has to be there as well. And I think it is in a lot of those fantasy
Right.
now. Like I love the Hunger Games. I
Yeah.
thought that was so well written. I was riveted.
And is there a strong, either a strong market or a strong community of young of writers for youth in Quebec, in Canada?
In Canada, definitely. I mean, I'm a member of 3 different writing organizations that are all dedicated to works for younger readers. So that would include teens, middle grade, even children. Um, and like I said, I mean, publishers are looking for good manuscripts.
Right.
Parents want their kids reading. I
Right.
think today more than ever, parents are looking to put good books in their kids' hands. And I mean, there's just so much wonderful material out there for younger readers. So I think there is a good, healthy market. I know that publishers are currently looking for middle grade fiction.
Right.
They've talked about how the market kind of got saturated with YA over the past decade or so, that mushroomed and became really big, and that now publishers are looking for good, strong middle grade fiction. So the market is there, but the manuscripts that new writers send out have to be strong.
Of course. Right.
And
That's
that
the
would
bottom
obviously,
line.
that would be the goal in the
Yeah.
course, is to
Yeah.
make sure that manuscript is as strong as it can be
Right.
before you send it out. There's no point in sending something out before it's really ready.
Right.
And if ready means taking 2, 3, 4 years, I mean, I've taken that long with some
Yeah.
of mine, then that's the time that you do need to take. But I do believe that there is a home somewhere for anybody who has a really good, strong manuscript, especially if there's something about it that's unique or special,
Yeah.
that hasn't been done before. That's certainly something that we could look at in the class. Is,
Right.
look at the whole publishing scene, what publishers are out there. Unfortunately, there are no English language publishers in Quebec
Right.
for youth. There used to be. There was Lobster Press years ago, and they went out of business. So it's all centered, mostly centered in Ontario. There's Orca Books in BC.
Right.
But the nice thing about writing in Canada is that you don't need an agent to be looked at by a publisher, which is not true in the States.
Right.
In the States, publishers won't look at a manuscript that's not, in general, anyways, won't look at anything that's not submitted through an agent. And in Canada, that's not true. I mean, I don't have an agent.
Right.
Um, I probably could if I put some effort into it, but I'm quite happy just having this relationship directly with the publisher.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in addition to writing and publishing, you've also been teaching writing, not since 1966,
No,
since
a little bit later.
1996.
Yes, thank you. I
And
needed those 30 years, to hone my craft. Yeah.
And you've also mentored a number of novice
Yes, I have.
writers.
Yeah.
What do you find most rewarding about teaching writing?
Well, I love watching a piece of writing get better.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it's the way a coach feels about working with an athlete, just watching the performance get stronger and stronger. I mean, I love taking a piece and looking at it and critiquing it and talking with the writer about, what the writer could do to make it move faster, to make the writing richer, to make the setting more vivid, to just making it better overall. Right. And I've also really enjoyed, I've mentored 4 people now through the Quebec Writers Federation. And it's really fascinating to look at how everybody's writing process is completely different. And it reinforces for me how there really is no right way to write.
Right.
Well, we all have our own ways.
Yeah.
My way is not anybody else's way, I'm sure. And I've worked with writers who worked very piecemeal and wrote the ending first, which boggled my mind. Like, I don't know how you could do that. And I've worked with others who worked very methodically through the whole thing. And so it's interesting just to see how the process is completely different for everybody. But I go back to what I said before. I just basically really love watching a piece of writing get better.
Yeah, lovely. So in January, you'll be teaching writing for youth.
Yes.
This is a 10-week course offered through the McGill Writing Center. So who's this course for?
Well, I think it could be for anybody who's already written a manuscript and they're looking now. I mean, at a certain point, writing's very solitary.
Yeah.
It's you and your computer, or believe it or not, some people still write longhand. I don't, but and at a certain point, I think you really do need that community of other writers. You need other pairs of eyes.
Right.
When you're ready for that. Not everybody's ready for that. So sometimes people come to a workshop and they don't want to share, and that's fine too.
Yeah.
That's fine too. But if they're ready to share, it's so valuable to have the feedback of, not just me, but of everybody else who's in the class. So anybody who has a manuscript and they're looking for that next step, maybe people who don't have a manuscript but have always kind of thought, I'd like to try this just to learn more about the genre, because I'm hoping that will bring in excerpts of successful books and
right.
look at examples and that sort of thing. So for anybody who maybe just wants to find out more about middle grade fiction and young adult fiction, anybody maybe who just loves children's literature and reads a lot of, I'm telling you, I know a lot of adults who only read YA or read a lot of YA in addition to other things, which would be where I fall. I mean, I read a lot of everything.
Right.
So even just for people who love the genre and want to approach it from the other angle, from the creator's angle. So it's quite broad.
And just one final sort of teaser question for anybody who's interested in taking the course, which is actually already open for registration. What aspects of either writing in general, if I can use that term, or writing for youth in particular will the course focus on? What will be some of the sort of touch points?
Well, first of all, I thought that maybe we would, even though I sometimes feel it's a bit artificial to break a story down into its components.
Exactly.
There's plot, there's setting, there's
Yeah.
character, there's point of view. But it is important to have an awareness of all of the different conventions of
Right.
literature and how they're working together in your text. So I thought we would take each of those and really talk about them and look at them.
Right.
So for example, if we're talking character, how to make sure that because character is the heart of the story, especially for young readers. A young reader will really connect with a character.
Yeah.
So how to make sure that your character is coming across as strongly as possible. Is the writer exploiting every tool in the toolkit that they can to really bring that character to life, to focus on voice, to make sure that your character has a strong and interesting voice.
Right.
To look at things like plot, pacing is very important. Does the book, because the young reader will not have the patience that an adult reader has to sit through a very dull beginning, hoping that this is going to start picking up
Right.
in chapter 5 or 6. They just
They don't
won't
have
do
the
that.
patience, yeah.
So is your plot engaging right from the get-go? And that's especially important for when you're sending a manuscript to a publisher, because they get a lot of work.
Yeah.
And if they're not engaged in the first couple of pages, they're not going to continue reading either. So we look at plot, pacing, structure, how maybe sometimes I've worked with writers where you kind of go, I think the middle of your book would make a better opening.
Right.
And maybe some could be told, some of what you're writing in the opening chapters would be best rendered in flashback, would make it move faster, would make it more engaging for the reading.
Yeah.
Even though these are young readers, these smart kids,
Yeah.
they want to be engaged. They don't want to be told everything. That's another big thing we look at. Are you telling the reader everything, or are you leaving something for the reader to figure out on his or her own? It's a matter of kind of teasing the reader along.
Right.
You really need to respect the reader's intelligence. I mean, especially with kids, know when they're being talked down to.
Yeah.
I really believe that. You can't fool a child. You can fool an adult, but you can't fool a child. I really don't think you can.
Yeah.
They're going to detect that immediately.
I think that's a great line to end on.
Okay.
You can fool an adult,
but you can't fool
not
a child.
a child.
Exactly.
Okay, well, Laurie, thank you so much
thank
for
you
spending
very
some
much.
time with
I'm
us.
delighted.
And again, the course starts on January the 23rd.
Hope to see you there.